there. How are you? Welcome, Mark Eanes and his wonderful wife, Maria, to our webinar. It's nice to see you all. How are you?
Great. Looking forward to this.
Thank you. So are we. And thank you for taking the time today to join us as we wait for all of these participants to enter. How about you tell us where you guys are right now?
I didn't quite hear the question. There was a
I was
bell.
going to say,
Ah,
tell us where you're joining us from. You can tell I'm here on Madeline Island. Where are you
I,
guys joining
I
us
love your
from?
setup. Oh, we are located in Richmond, Virginia. We've been here about a year and a half. We moved from California, the northern part of California, near San Francisco, where I spent most of my adult life. So we're newbies here in Richmond. I just retired after 35 years of teaching at the colleges there, and I wanted to be closer to my family who live in the area, and we got ourselves a lovely home here in the woods with a studio in the back. So we're happy campers here in Virginia now.
Gosh, and I have to ask you because I'm not originally from the United States. I'm originally was born and raised in England. And us English always like to talk about the weather. So how is the weather in Richmond right now?
Well, it's a great question. So in California, we have two seasons, wet and dry,
Yeah.
mostly dry. So it's been really great to be here experiencing the four seasons, really distinct one from the other. And this winter, it was great because we had really cold weather and we had lots of snow on at least two occasions. So we got to chop wood and use our wood stove and get cozy on those really super cold nights. And it's been great.
That's wonderful. I mean, it is it's definitely a very different experience having these different seasons. I am here from located in Madeline Island right now, and it's not as warm as it is here. We've
Mm.
got an ice road that just broke down, and so now we've got the ferry bringing us in. But enough about the weather. Mark and Maria, I looks like everyone has sort of joined us, so I wanted love to get this webinar up and running. So let's just everyone looks like they're here. So hi, everyone, and welcome to Madeline Island's webinar with Mark Eanes. My name is Annie Meach Sumner, and I have the pleasure of hosting this webinar and spending the next hour with a celebrated artist, Mark Eanes. Mark, thank you for joining us here today. I see that you are joined by your lovely wife, Maria, who I don't want to let go before we introduce her to everyone. She, as Mark said, is sort of the glue, and she's like, basically his partner in crime is what he said. He couldn't do this without his wife Maria, and we're so glad she is going to be joining you on the island. She, as she said earlier to me, is the technical part. She's going to help you with the paper. She's going to help you with the glue, and Mark is going to be doing all of the teaching for you. So you will not be left alone with it. You will be in fabulous hands with these two, with our workshop this summer. So Maria, I'm so glad you had a choice to join us. I know that a lot of these people on this webinar have probably seen you in a lot of Mark's online courses. So we're so glad you're here. We can't wait to meet you in person. And before I hand this webinar over to you, Mark,
Yes.
I'd like to share with our audience a little bit about the location that Mark's workshop will be located with us on Madeline Island. As you see, it's behind us. It's our flagship location on Madeline Island. It is the Madeline Island School of the Arts, located on Lake Superior in the Apostle Islands. Getting here can be easy and scenic. You fly into Duluth, Minnesota, enjoy a lakeshore drive, and then take a short 20-minute car ferry. Once you're on the island, you are surrounded by stunning. We have some videos of the island coming up, I think, if you bear with me. Once you're on the island, you'll be surrounded by stunning views. There we go. Of the perfect atmosphere for a week of creativity and inspiration. What you're seeing now are views of the ferry boat. You're leaving the beautiful Bayfield, and these are images of our flagship campus. These are the caves, and these are your accommodations while you're staying with us. Lots of greenery and color, full of life on this island, and we're so looking forward to it. And without further ado, I will go ahead and hand this over to you. I hope you will all consider joining us here with Mark. As a reminder, after Mark's presentation, we'll have some Q&As as time permits, and at the end of the presentation. So please put all your questions in that chat box, and we'll get to as many as we can. With all of that, I will hand this off to you, Mark. Thank you very much.
Can I just say thank you, Annie, for the introduction? I have to run, so I'm going to leave you all with Mark, but I just wanted to pop in and just show my face since I will be there helping all the artists. So thanks for introducing me, and see you in June.
Thank you.
Bye.
Great. And so welcome everyone. Even though I can't see all your faces, hopefully when I am done with this, with the Q&A, I will be able to see the gallery of faces, and that's great. Before I dive into my slide presentation, and by the way, I'm really excited to be there at Madeline Island. This is the first time that this will be an opportunity for me to be there, and I'm really looking forward to this. So just a very brief backstory, if you will, about myself as an artist. I had the very good fortune of knowing when I was 17 years old, right out of high school, that I wanted to do art and be an artist for the rest of my life. I took a lot of drawing and painting courses back in the early 70s, so this is to date myself. And I was lucky enough to have some fantastic teachers along the way. And so after, a number of years, I began to teach at the college level in the Bay Area near San Francisco, going back to about 1990. And there I taught drawing courses and painting courses, everything from basic drawing and intermediate drawing to advanced drawing, but also painting as well. The genesis of this color and design workshop started when I was asked by the chair of my department to teach a course in color and design. This is going back many years ago. And I was really intrigued by this notion because in my experience with working with young artists and painters and even older artists and painters, the two areas that everyone seemed to really struggle with was color, because it's just so vast and so mysterious, and design. What makes for a good design? What makes for a good composition? And so when we got hit with the COVID back in March of 2020, I was in the midst of teaching a semester, I was doing anatomy drawing and painting, and I had about 6 weeks left in the semester. And the chair of my department said, "Mark, you need to learn how to teach online by next week." Imagine. Thank God I had Maria, my wife, as the technical assistant, not even assistant, she was the genius. We quickly got our equipment in order and began to teach the rest of the semester for 6 weeks online. And it was successful. I had the good fortune right at the end of that semester to have been awarded a year-long sabbatical from my college, which then allowed us to put everything we've learned together, my teaching experience over 35 years, and now the new experience of learning the online experience. And we put together our first online course, which was the language of color. And that was followed a year later with the language of design and eventually the language of drawing. So that's sort of a very quick synopsis of how we've come to be here now. And I should also add, before I get to the slides, that for quite a bit of time before COVID, we were teaching color and design workshops in my studio in Benicia, California, near San Francisco. And we had a blast. We could accommodate up to 7 artists. And these were 3 to 5 day workshops. Maria would provide assistance, but also a lot of great food. And it was a very kind of informal, wonderful experience. We loved it. Why am I saying this? Well, because I haven't had the opportunity to teach in person since COVID, and this will be our first opportunity. And we're very excited to actually be able to be in the same studio with live human beings artists who are excited to learn about color and design. And so I just want to make that point that I'm very excited to be able to do that.
There's nothing like being in person, that's for sure, Mark.
It's not, yeah, absolutely.
It's so
So,
rewarding from the students. I mean, for you, not just for the
oh
students,
yes.
for you as well. I mean, I see it during every workshop. So thank you for saying that. I appreciate it.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, there's a lot of advantages to online teaching because we've been able to connect with people all over the world, which is terrific. But as you say, there's nothing like being there with people in the flesh. And you're right. I consider myself the perennial student. So thank you for pointing that out. All right, well, let's begin. I'm going to share here the first slide, and I'm going to try to minimize this if I can. Or perhaps I'll just live with it and set this over a little bit like that. Can everyone see this okay? Can you see this okay, Annie?
I can, yes, Mark.
First slide is an image by Joseph Albers, and I really like this. Color is relative, and his quote is, "Color is hit and miss. It deceives continually." This is the interesting thing about color. When I conducted my courses and when I taught at the college for so many years, I would ask the artists and the students about their relationship to color, and particularly the painters in their studios. I would ask for a show of hands, who struggles with color? And lots of hands would go up, and then we would talk about that. Well, why is there a struggle? The answers were all over the place. I put out a lot of colors on my palette, Mark, and I don't know what to do with them. I want to get a color, but I'm not sure how to get it. I mixed a beautiful color the other day, and I don't know how to get back to that color. When I'm mixing color, I get mud, and I don't know what to do with that, and on and on and on. So that's why when the chair of my department asked me to teach a color and design workshop, I was both very intimidated and excited all at once. I had done a lot of teaching of painting prior to that, but never a full semester of color and design. So I searched mightily online for a good textbook and came up with the one by David Horning, my new good friend and best colleague in this department. And I used his book as a text, co-joined with my own experience and my own philosophy about teaching and teaching color. And that's really sort of the genesis of this. This is a slide of me actually in our studio in Benicia when we were there teaching. I bring a lot of images to the workshop because I love the idea of informing students about their lineage of art, where they sit, where we sit as artists in the lineage of art. So I bring in a lot of images of different artists to talk about not just color, but the design. And you'll notice that I've got everything from the old school like Matisse all the way up to Ellsworth Kelly and Mondrian, et cetera, et cetera. So this is just a snapshot of one of the walls that I produce. And you'll notice here these three images. We're going to talk about these a little bit more. At some point, the artists that are in my workshop will start to produce these rather simple but rather complex. I know that's a paradox. They're simple in their sort of orientation, like what are we going to do here with just 5 or 7 shapes, but to get the color relationships correct, that's what we'll be focusing on, color relationships. So the next few slides, the next several slides, everybody, is sort of a snapshot, if you will, a synopsis of how the course goes. I'm not going to show everything because it's quite involved over the course of 5 days, but I think you'll get a good idea once you see these images. For instance, on the left, the artist will be producing spectrums of color. In this case, you can see going from yellow to red, from yellow to blue, and from blue to red. We talk in the first part about the color wheel and understanding the color wheel. So there is, in the beginning, some lecture and demonstration on color theory. The interesting thing about that is that color theory can be too didactic and too dense for a lot of people, and they start to glaze over in their eyes after about 10 minutes. So I make sure that I don't do that. I make supreme effort in explaining color, the understanding of color, and the relationships of color in the most understandable way possible. And then with demonstrations, the major part of our workshop is to roll up our sleeves, get the paint out, and start mixing color and using it. First in these swatches. These are all little swatches of paper, which we'll discuss. Once the student creates color that they'll find in the color light spectrum, which is these colors to the left, then they're free to create all kinds of other colors in different saturation levels. What am I talking about? Well, let me go to a few more slides and you'll get the idea. One of the exercises that we'll do, I came up with, is called random mixing. Notice here, and this is me standing here, that there's a variety of colors here on this paper. And there's the palette where I'm just mixing up a lot of colors. And essentially, random mixing is one of my favorite exercises. What happens? An artist puts out a given yellow, red, and blue on the palette. That's it. 3 colors, 3 primary colors, yellow, red, and blue, plus white. And by mixing literally in a random way, they discover that they can create a whole universe of colors, not hundreds, but potentially thousands of colors, just with 1 yellow, 1 red, and 1 blue. So automatically they begin to realize, oh my God, there's a huge power invested in this idea of working with a limited palette. So that's what these swatches here represent, these 4 by 5 inch swatches. In my own work, this is a shot from me in the studio.
Wow.
Sometimes I might go into my studio, everybody, and I might not, maybe I'm in between some work and I'm kind of not sure what it is I want to do. And on more than one occasion, I'll just mix color all day long. And this is an example of that session. So all these colors were created with 1 yellow, 1 red, and 1 blue. Now we'll get into the weeds a little bit later on, but basically the students will be bringing 2 tubes of yellow, 2 tubes of red, and 2 tubes of blue plus white. And we'll discuss that at the workshop, but each primary color, yellow, red, and blue, it has a cool version and a warm version. Now, I mention this right now, here and now, because one of the reasons that artists struggle in mixing color, let's say they want to get a certain green that they have in their mind's eye, and they just can't get it, or a given orange. The reason they're struggling getting that particular green that's in their mind's eye, or the orange, is they're starting off with the wrong yellow or red or blue. So we will get into that. And the great thing about this workshop is that when the students leave after, in this case, 5 days, they will feel so much more at ease and confident, not just about mixing color and getting to the colors they really want to work with, but being able to put them into designs that are harmonious. My goal is to help first of all, my goal is to meet each artist where they are. That's really important. That's been my philosophy going all the way back to my teaching some 35 years. Meet the artists where they are, because we're all coming from different places and we all come from different levels of experience and background. And that's super important to understand. And so that's my first goal, is to meet the person where they are in their work, in their journey. My second goal and mission is to empower that artist with tools and language and strategies and even conceptualizations so that they can feel more comfortable or more confident in the work. Let me continue. So once the artists on day 1 and 2 create lots of colors, then becomes the challenging, fun, and rather, well, challenging part, which is to organize. You can see these 2 people are organizing all these colors. Now, everyone works differently, as I just said, but in many cases, the artists create dozens and dozens and dozens of colors by day 2 or so. Then they are tasked with organizing these. Now, notice how these are kind of wrinkled and so on and so forth. Not to worry, they flatten out very nicely once you put some books and weights on them. So just to be clear, but you can see these wonderful workstations that each person will have at their station. So that's the next step. After creating a lot of color, then we need to organize them. Why and how are we organizing them? We're organizing them this way. Again, I don't want to go into the weeds of the color theory, but there are 3 levels of what we call saturation, or the intensity is a better, more easily understood word of color. The most intense colors are what we call prismatic. They're fully intense, fully saturated. They represent, in a way, the color light spectrum. That if you were to put a prism in your window and the sunlight comes through and it's a darkened room, you're going to get the rainbow on that wall, you see. We'll talk about that discovery of Isaac Newton back in the 17th century. Well, these colors are as close as one can get with tubes of paint to mirror the intensity. So these are all prismatic hues, okay? Let's jump over to this area here, which we have muted hues. Notice that some of these are fairly intense, but they are not as intense as these here. Why? Because the artist has added either small amounts of white, gray, black, or a color's complement to reduce the intensity of the colors. So these are known as muted hues. And then finally, and very importantly, we come to the chromatic grays. Notice how these colors are much less intense. They are so beautiful. The history of art and painting is filled with chromatic grays, coming from the warm areas to the cool areas to the neutral grays and so on. These have been de-intensified or desaturated, you might say, by adding larger amounts of white, gray, black, or a color's complement. Once the artists have figured out how to organize the colors in those 3 levels of saturation, the next step is they are tasked with creating designs. Now, these designs, and I'll try not to get too deep into the weeds here because they'll be doing lots of that at the actual in the studio, but these are designed in order to help the artist understand color relationships. Color relationships. If you take a look at this image right here, for instance, there is a wonderful relationships between how many colors do we have here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's only 6 colors and shapes here. So I keep the parameters for these exercises quite narrow. Why? If I narrow the parameters and make sure that the artists are working with either rectangles or squares, then they don't have to think about making images. When David Horning and I discussed this together, we realized that in the very beginning, we were allowing artists to use organic shapes, and that was problematic because they were trying to create images and trying to create narratives and so on. It kind of got in the way of just simply seeing what is it to put one color next to another color, and how much blue do you need to balance out the yellow and the red and this yellow over here. That's really the secret and the key to this particular exercise. I really like this shot here. Here you see the artist working on a design, and I love what's going on up here because it really shows you something. These are each separate designs. They just line them up. Here's one design, there's another one, here's another one. So they have 1, 2, 3, 4. There are 5 designs here that she just butted them up. Notice how they change in the saturation level from very intense to very muted and quiet and grayed down. So this will be the nature of the exercises. Once we get a hang of that, the walls will start to look like this. These are some examples at day 3 and day 4 of what happens in the studio. And it's marvelous because the wall just gets filled with these color exercises. But we don't stop there. This is an inroads to a much wider, deeper understanding, which takes me to part 2, if you will. Notice this painting here and this spectrum here of color. I'd like to explain what this is because this is very important with where we go. I have devised an exercise, and I did this in college for years and years, and I introduced it into the language of color course as well as this, of looking at different artists, past and present, of all stripes. In other words, the masters of art in painting. Here's how it works. Here in this desk of the student, she's got an image of Degas' painting of the horse track. They are tasked with really studying the colors that are in a given painting, and they make a spectrum here. Notice how there are notes here, and they are making the spectrum based on the proportion of color in that particular painting. So she's seeing this much white, off-white, muted blue, muted greens, dark gray, and she's making notes here along these colors. In this way, they really start to really study, not just glance at or look at great art, but they start to study it for the color relationships. Then, in this case, the artist chose to start to sketch out the design of the Degas, but here's an important point, everybody. I asked the artist, don't be literal. Don't go into all the details. See if you can look at the basic structure of that piece and see it for its abstraction. And this becomes very important. How can we look at a work of art, in this case in the workshop, and see it for its basic abstract structure rather than getting caught up in unnecessary details? And that's what's going on here, which then allowed her to make this painting. That is the study. It doesn't need to go any further for her to understand what's happening here. So I want to show you just a few more examples of this exercise. Here, the artist is looking at the New York painter Sean Scully. Now, that previous one had many colors, but I want to also show you it can be simple. Here we only have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 colors. And look how beautiful that palette is. It's a beautiful palette. It's all grayed out, but it's quite lovely. On the other hand, you have this artist working, this student working. This is an artist, Uan Uglo, who we looked at. And here the artist looked at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 colors. But that's a beautiful arrangement of colors in this palette. So once again, the artist is looking for the proportions of this much of an earth tone, for this much red and dark, and so on. Now, in this case, this became her study, which I really enjoy this. It has very little relationship to the figure, but what she's done is taken this as a diving board, if you will, to create her own design, and I think it's quite successful. Here are some more examples of students in my workshop in my studio. So here's someone working just directly without the collage, but just working directly with paint, which is an option. And here, the same artist is looking at this art here, but notice in her study, everybody, that she's broken it down in the most simplest of terms with that color palette, you see. So there are innumerable ways to work with this idea of looking at another artist and getting ideas for color and for design. Here's another example. This artist chose to use her iPhone, and she brought up a painting by a California painter by the name of, I just drew a blank. This is, bear with me, it's not Demon Corn, it's Elmer Bischoff. Thank you, Mark. My Rolodex gets a little fuzzy after so many years. This is Elmer Bischoff, a Bay Area figurative artist. It's a tiny image of a figure inside an interior, if you can make that out on your screen. So she had this very small image, and this is her piece. So she's using those colors and the simple design to come to her own conclusion, you see. So when we start delving into that arena, the walls start to look like this, with all kinds of designs and drawings and sketches and spectrums of color and people's take on different artists and so on and so forth. This to me is when it gets very exciting, because after all, the entire history of art is this idea of artists looking at other artists, past and present, to get connections. It's not about making copies. I want to be very clear about this. This is how I was taught as a young artist, to look at, to study, to appreciate, and even to emulate the great artists that we so resonate with and respect and admire. these are some images I wanted to share with you for any of you artists who are figurative about the use of color and design. Now, these images are coming from my class at the California College of the Arts, where I taught for 35 years. So I just wanted to make this point that all of these students and their work happened only after they did many of these exercises that we'll be doing at Madeline Island. This self-portrait that one of my students did is so beautiful because she really understands how to operate with color. Now, to be clear, I created very narrow parameters for the artists. I wanted them to create images, in this case, either a self-portrait or in this case, the study of the figure. And here, I wanted them to create images in which to create form and volume, light and shadow. I asked them, please avoid doing much in the way of blending or smearing or smudging to get your tonal subtle differences. Instead, use color. If you want the nose to have a sense of volume, learn how to use these different colors and values to create that volume. If you want to have a really beautiful design, don't think just about the figure. What's happening in the background to support that? So we get into figure and ground relationships. If you want to understand how to create a mood in a given piece, because the mood here is very different, understand the importance of value. How light, medium, or dark do you want your colors to be? If you want to understand the use of color relationships, then understand the relationships between having your muted colors, your chromatic grays, but occasionally using your prismatic hues to punctuate and to punch up a given area, etc., etc., etc. So here are some other examples as well. Now, again, these are from my students at the California College of the Arts, both in the Fine Arts Department as well as the Illustration Department. So I had them do a lot of a lot of master studies, and then they would oftentimes do their own version, which is a whole other chapter. This is a study of Vuon Uglo of still life. But here's where it gets interesting. Now, let's be clear about one thing, everybody. We will not be doing this particular exercise at Madeline Island. Why am I showing you these images? Simply to show you the potential for you figurative artists out there of how you can take your work even further by looking at other artists. And by the way, for people who are working abstractly, I hope I've made it abundantly clear that you can also do that as well. So let's take a look. This is a student's work, and he was looking at Fairfield Porter, this beautiful painting. It's a study of Fairfield Porter as a porch scene. Using those same exact colors, he then did his own version of the interior scene of the California College of the Arts. Just a wonderful painting. Again, this is how I learned as a young student. So finally, just a few shots here of, this was my studio in Benicia, California when I lived there. And you can see that it was a much sort of cozier, informal setting, which we just absolutely loved. We did this for quite a long time. And you'll notice that it's just a beehive of activity. Each person had their own station, and Maria and I could kind of walk around and work with people, which I'm looking forward to doing there at Madeline Island. Here is another workshop I did. This was a 10-day workshop in Italy, in the Umbria region of Italy, that we did several years ago. And interestingly, for what it's worth, a number of these artists I've become fast friends with, and we still are in constant touch. Susan Sakamoto for one, Jamie Madison for others, Deborah Coulter back there. And these are people that we've really become close friends, and we've hung out with them, and they come to our Zoom sessions on our online courses, et cetera, et cetera. So lasting friendships can occur here, not just between us and students, but the students and themselves. For instance, Susan, as an example, and Deborah and Jamie still are in touch with each other on a regular basis, and they go to other workshops together. So we love this idea of community. That's, I think, my other goal, is this joy of creating community that is self-sustaining and where people cross-pollinate with one another to get ideas and connections. And this is the last slide here. It's a Zen saying, which is one of my favorites. I open up most of my courses, both at the college and at the workshop, with this saying: in the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities. In the experts, there are few. I'm being silent so you can chew on that. But what's interesting is this: can an expert who's really started to understand fully and even master their craft, can an expert still have beginner's mind? I say this, everyone, because some of the students who I had the most challenging moments with at my college were some of the most talented students who came into my studio for the first time into our classes and felt like they knew it all. And they were not open to the possibilities. So I've asked them to draw with their opposite hand, for instance. They would look at me like, "Are you crazy? What are you doing? I don't want to draw with my opposite hand. Why would I do that?" And I would say, well, there's a possibility that you might learn to see differently if you work with your opposite hand. So this is just one of hundreds of ways of thinking about how to keep our minds open to the many possibilities, regardless of how much experience we have in the given field, and regardless of whether we have so-called mastered a given craft, if you will. So with that, I will stop sharing, Annie, and come back to you and to the
Wonderful. Thank you, Mark. That was incredible. I really appreciate that wonderful presentation that you put together about how a week with you, 5 days with you runs. I just want to extend my heartfelt thanks and a wonderful, enriching webinar. What I really appreciated was your approach to meeting each artist, sort of where they are, and your in emphasis on empowering us with color relationships. Is it really true that everyone just brings a red, a yellow, a blue, two reds, two yellows, two blues, and two whites? Is that true?
That is true,
Oh,
plus raw umber, which we'll get
wow.
into. It's a lovely earth tone. And then, of course, there's the different papers and so on and so forth. So with my tools and materials list, I do include all the information, all the tools and materials the people will have to have. I will add one more thing. If any of the folks out there are actually signed up or are considering signing up, and this is something I meant to talk with you and Allie about, so we might as well use this time now.
Absolutely.
Because of the second half where we're looking at different painters, I will be bringing, now when we taught at my studio back in California, I had my whole library available to the students. They could just go and pick up a given artist and open up the book and
Super.
have at it. We won't be able to do that. So here are my thoughts. There's at least a couple possibilities here. If any of the artists out there who are either registered or thinking about it, they can either bring their, if they have a laptop or a
iPad.
an
Like an
iPad,
iPad,
then
yeah.
they can do research and find given art and artists that they can use, and that would be perfect.
Yeah.
Because otherwise they'd have to do, oh, I don't know, photocopies in color, which is also another way to do it if they don't have the other option. The main thing is if they can bring several artists who they want to learn from. And this is fascinating. I'll tell you why. Just the other day, we were meeting with some of our artists who are taking the language of color. And we were talking about this exercise, right? This idea of studying other artists and to learn from them. And I heard from one of my artists who put it so well. She said, whenever I do, and we avoid the word copy, although that's what it is. She goes, whenever I do a study of a certain artist, and her teacher is a colleague of mine, Larry McClary from the college. He said, whenever you do a study, make sure you're asking questions of that artist.
Yeah.
What do you want to know and learn from this artist? If you're doing a
Well,
study,
it's true. It's this discussion that you said, looking at other artists, both past and present, and making that connection only deepens our understanding of color, because you want to think about what that artist was thinking when
yes.
they painted it and what was there. I think it's inspiring to see how studying another artist's palette can help us create our own unique color.
Yes,
It's
because we can get stuck. We can get stuck with the things we already know and we already do. And so to get out of that, to open up new doors of possibilities, this is why we do. We also have color bias.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
You've got a lot of fun.
For years I wouldn't work with violet because I just didn't care for it much as a color.
Wow.
Now, not so much.
It's interesting. It's going to be an incredible week. Your insight has sort of given everyone, I hope, a fresh perspective, sort of a new, renewed excitement for exploring color. So thank you, Mark, for sharing your wisdom and passion with us. It's going to be an incredible week. I agree with the iPad and the laptop. We'll have power available at each station for your students if that's something that they bring with them. In past, people have brought postcards that they've collected when they've gone to galleries. That's something that, I could
Yeah.
suggest. I've seen happen before. I do have a quick question for you.
Please.
Who are some historical or contemporary artists who primarily used limited palettes that you admire, Mark?
Oh boy.
Oh no, is that too much? I'm sorry.
Oh, no, no, no. I say oh boy because some years ago, a friend of mine, a painter, a colleague, and we sat down over coffee and we thought, let's do an exercise, see if we can come up with our top 10 favorite artists.
Yeah.
It was nearly impossible because it's like, how far back do we go? You know, I could choose 10 from different centuries.
Absolutely. I'm sure there's too many, but that's how lucky we are to have that kind of influence for
Yeah.
these kind of studies.
It's
And I
a
like the word study.
it's a great question, and I'll do my best to answer it. So, actually, just recently, I'm going to go really recent for a moment. I wanted to go up to New York. Now we're on the East Coast, we can do that. We can hop on a train and we can go to New York, which I love. So there was a show at the Met of early Renaissance from Siena, 14th century, 1350 to 14th century, of these very beautiful Renaissance paintings. Most of them were quite small. A lot of them had gold leaf. They were all religious paintings, but they were stunningly beautiful. And the presentation was fantastic because there was these darkened rooms with these beautiful paintings, well lit. And the palette knocked me out. The palette was these yellow golds, pinks, neutral grays, striking blues with touches of red. And I thought, oh my God. So I'm taking photographs. And my most recent painting, which is a large 4 by 5 foot painting, which I posted on my Instagram, is that palette. I absolutely stole it. So, there's one good example right there.
Wow.
Um, um,
It,
Miranda,
it,
yeah,
it almost just brings you an added bonus to going back to these gorgeous galleries and museums and anywhere. And it makes you look at color in a very different way. Or makes you look at these artists and what they've created in a totally different way. I used to look at paintings and tried to figure out the story and the history and the timeline and what was being said. And now I feel like looking at the color is like a whole nother level for everyone. So
absolutely.
thank you for
Very
sort
much
of
so.
bringing that back to us. And for those of you that are on this webinar and those of you that watch this webinar, it's something to really consider. If you feel like you've pushed yourself as far as you can go with your art, what Mark is here is to show you just another venue of making it even more approachable.
Yes. And on this issue of looking at the masters, there's another layer I'd like to add really briefly. So I suggest to the artists and students, you can go a couple of different ways. For instance, in selecting an artist or artists to look at and to study, one can choose an artist whose style, if for lack of a better word, is similar to one's own.
Mm,
Like I really resonate with this particular style, this voice, if you will, this way of working, and it's in alignment with me, and so let me go deeper and learn more. Or one can go the other way and go to a very opposite kind of art and artist and way of working and colors that they would normally not consider if they
mm,
really want to try that avenue and stretch in a different way.
wonderful.
Yeah.
Wow, I appreciate it, Mark. This has been a wonderful hour spent with you. I know, and I can speak for everyone. Oops, I have one other question here. Someone's asking in the chat.
Okay, please.
We will respond to it. It's someone asking about transportation to the campus. But Manuela said, thank you so much, Mark, for an amazing presentation. Someone did say, what are the specific color, brand name / hue being used in the workshop?
Good question. I believe that my tools and materials list um, doesn't require that the artist specifically buy a given brand. Now, for what it's worth, I like Golden brand products. I think Golden is one of the better products out there. So in the photograph, they'll see that brand. Do they have to have that particular brand? Not necessarily, but I will add something. There are other great brands. Liquitex is a good brand. Grumbacher, I think, makes acrylics. But here's my advice: don't buy cheap paint. Don't buy the cheapest of the paint out there, because they will have a lot of fillers in them, and the color will not be as vibrant, and your admixtures will not be as vibrant. So it does pay to have you don't have to get the most expensive brand out there, but you certainly shouldn't be buying the cheapest brand. If you need to, for financial reasons, get something in the middle, that's fine. I do ask the artist to buy a certain size on the colors, but the white tube, they'll need to have a larger tube because they'll end up using more of it.
Okay.
I hope I answered her question. And by the way, with the time remaining, for what it's worth, I really would love to hear any thoughts, questions from the artists out there. I always say to these folks that I'm having Zoom sessions with, please don't be shy. Feel free. And if you have no questions, that's fine, but please don't hesitate.
We
Happy
do.
to
We
answer.
have about 10 more minutes. So please, no question, this is your chance with Mark. Please pop a question in the chat. But what I am going to remind everyone else here is that Mark will be joining us for color and design. And you saw a little bit of the color and a little bit of the design during his webinar, June 23rd to the 27th this summer on Madeline Island. You can go to Madeline Island, MadelineIslandSchool.com, and you can visit our website for more information. If we don't have any other questions, I'd love to thank all of you for joining us today. Just a reminder, the webinar was recorded and will be available later this week, and we'll post it to our MISA YouTube channel. We do all encourage you to join Mark in his upcoming workshop. It's going to be a wonderful experience. He and Maria will be here on the island. And like Mark said, there is nothing like being in person. For them, they've done so many online courses from COVID on, that getting back in person, just like you saw when they were, I think it was in Italy, Mark, those pictures?
Yes.
Like he said, it's a cross-pollination of different levels and different talent. And there's nothing more like being together on a campus, enjoying each person during meals, going for walks in the morning. It's just an incredible experience in person on the island. We hope to see you all there. Have a wonderful rest of your day. And Mark, thank you. One more thing, please tell us.
Yes, lastly, I thank you for all of that. I would like to invite the artists to check out, Maria and I have created YouTube videos. So if they go to Mark Eanes Studio at YouTube, we have two things that we do. One's called Nuts and Bolts, which is technical stuff, so they can get quite a bit of free information there. And the other is called Coffee and Tea, where we have longer discussions that are a little more philosophical in their nature. So I invite them to check us out on YouTube, or to go to my website, markeanes.com, and there you'll see what I'm up to.
I couldn't agree more, Mark. Those websites, those Coffee and Tea with you and Maria, are delightful. It's a really nice escape, and they're not super long. So if you can just hop on them and just check in with what they're up to, I hugely head over. What is that again on the YouTube again, Mark?
It's Mark Eanes Studio. I think it's mark.eanes.studio.
Okay. Okay. Wonderful. Well, thank you again, Mark. It was wonderful. I really
My
appreciate
pleasure.
everyone for joining us, and we will see you all very soon, hopefully on the island this summer. Look forward to talking to you soon, Mark. Take care. Say hi to
Thank
Maria.
you, Annie. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.